Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Poštovani gledalci, gošća emisije Recite Al Jazeeri je Carolom Rackete, poznata aktivistica za ljudska prava i zastupnica u Evropskom parlamentu. Sa njom razgovaramo o genocidu u Gazi, što znači biti antifašista danas, te kako povezati ekološki, socijalni i antirasistički angažman. Carola, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, there are many things I would like to talk to you about, but let's start with the most pressing issues. So watching the ongoing genocide in Gaza unfold, do you feel frustrated by the EU's lack of decisive action? And why is it that European leaders keep defaulting to cautious statements rather than taking decisive action?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I think I'm not only frustrated, I'm really angry because we see the genocide happening before our eyes and European leaders are being complicit. And that is something which is just unbearable for anyone who has a conscience and who has eyes to see what is happening. And I think the reason why the EU is not taking action on one hand is global geopolitics and old alliances, which they have, particularly to the US, but also to Israel for decades, and which they don't want to interrupt because the US is still one of the staunchest supporters of Israel, even at this point. And the other reason, I think, is something like psychological effect. So not only the economic side, but also psychological effect that people don't want to look at the truth. They don't want to see the reality, because if you would call out what is happening, it also would mean that you have to take action, that you have to do something, and that you have to change something in the politics very concretely. And also that you have been doing something wrong until now. Because let's be honest, the Nakba is ongoing for decades. Gaza has been an open-air prison for decades. And people have just closed their eyes and pretended not to see it.
Many observers will say that, economic and strategic interests are tying the EU's hands when it comes to Israel. Now, in your view, apart from these strategic interests and perhaps the historical baggage and geopolitical factors, how strong is the pro-Israel lobby within the European Union?
I would say it's extremely strong, but of course it depends very much from one member state to the other. We can see that, for example, Ireland already closed down the embassy of Israel and created a museum for Palestine in this place, whereas Germany has extremely strong ties. And I think we have to be clear that the EU as a whole was built for their own economic advantage, and that has always been at the core of what the European Union does. No matter how much they talk about like human values and human rights and whatnot, they only care about the bottom line, about the economy and how to make money for the European Union corporations. And we have, or the European Union has extremely strong ties with the Israeli military for the arms industry. There's a lot of weapon deliveries. And there's also that narrative that all the weapons that Europe at some point might use themselves are being trialed in Israel. So it's actually really great for the European weapon manufacturers to have a place where these weapons can be used. So you see if they actually function well. So there is a huge, huge interest in the arms industry to keep sending and selling weapons to Israel. And I think that is a very, very strong point. And these lobbies, I mean, you have to understand that Brussels is a lobby capital of the world. It's the second biggest lobby town or city after Washington. So a lot of lobbyists are here, including from the arms industry, who always like push the Commission and push the national states as well to grow the arms industry.
Right. Perhaps in addition to that, we should also mention that there's very strong intelligence sharing between EU member states and Israel. And of course, some EU member states have been purchasing Israeli spyware and other sorts of gadgets to use in their intelligence capacities. Now, you know what is interesting? That over the last 12 to 14 months, I've noticed a striking disconnect between the massive public outrage on the level of the average citizen, especially among Europe's youth, and the rather diplomatic language coming from Brussels. And I was wondering, how do you make sense of this huge gap? The younger, especially the Gen Z, has been very vocal in voicing their support for the Palestinian cause.
Well, I think even though we call this a representative democracy, in many ways it is not. For example, in Germany, 14% of the adult population do not hold a German passport and cannot vote consequently. And I think this question of not having enough true representation of people in the parliament, being ministers in the government or in the EU Commission, people are not representing really the general population in terms of their background, in terms of their gender, in terms of where they feel they belong and what their cultural background is. And I think a lot of young people or friends that I've been speaking to that maybe don't have a white German background, let's say, they feel they're not belonging to the European countries anymore because the police is repressing them brutally. They're thinking about even leaving to another country because they feel like freedom of speech is really being infringed. And I think people become very cynic towards the institutions. They see that politicians are traitors, that our leaders are traitors. They're betraying the ideals that we have as human beings, that we share actually all around the world, that people become, I think, really, really frustrated and cynic about democratic representation. I think that is a huge risk that politicians should take serious.
Speaking of Germany, Germany has often been lauded as a model of memory culture. We have seen pro-Palestinian protesters banned and voices silenced and suppressed. How do you reconcile, how do you make sense of this crackdown with Germany's commitment to freedom of speech and to historical reckoning?
Well, I think the conclusion from the Holocaust should be really to protect minorities, to protect all religious communities, and to prevent war crimes, and especially genocide. And I think in this moment, that would mean very, very clearly to prevent a genocide against the Palestinian people carried out by the State of Israel. And at the same time, protecting Jewish people wherever they live and making a very, very clear distinction between the government of Israel and Jewish people, because we have to see that for Germany, the issue really is that German identity is really, really linked to the existence of the State of Israel. And often I feel that people feel attacked in their identity as German people, let's say, if we have to admit that the State of Israel is committing terrible war crimes and stands accused of genocide. And realizing that as the truth means that you have to criticize something that is within yourself. And I think many people have not had the courage to do that, but increasingly so. We also see that the tone in Germany is shifting. Even the German chancellor, who's a conservative, has recently come out very strongly to criticize Netanyahu, something that hasn't been seen like that before.
Right, but Germany still continues to sell arms to Israel, and nothing much on the economic exchange level has really changed. But some argue that Germany's sense of historical guilt has led to some sort of moral paralysis, where silence or complicity becomes the safer choice. It's really nothing has really changed since the October 7th in terms of Germany's relations with Israel. What do you expect the new German government to what actions do you expect from them to take over the next coming months?
I think you're right, and we have to be extremely clear. Germany is complicit in genocide. If the International Court of Justice in The Hague will find that Israel is guilty of genocide, many European countries, Germany most of all, but also the UK, France, others, will be held accountable for their complicity in these war crimes which are before our eyes. So unfortunately, even now at this moment, I have very little hope for the German government to change its stance unless the public pressure really would grow. Because I believe it doesn't matter actually so much who is in the government. It depends who is in the street, who is protesting, and we just need to mobilize, I think, in Germany, a lot more white German nationals to join the cause of the Palestinian people until they are free and demand an end to occupation.
Right, but Carola, at this stage, when you look at pro-Palestinian protests throughout the European Union, which segments of the society have been most vocal? Are we talking about, like the left wings, the left-wing associations? Are you talking about, European citizens with a migrant origin, or else?
I would say a lot of protests, of course, have been led by people who have a cultural background or heritage from Arabic countries or from Black or people of color communities around the world who are living here. But also, I would say, by young people generally who are more open to seeing the reality for what it is. But I think especially the fact that it's often people say from Arabic background that are in the streets, the police repression on them is a lot heavier because we do know that racism within the police forces is structural. So, for example, from Germany, we've all seen, I think, videos how the police goes into the protest and just randomly beats people, chokes people. Really, I think that happens because there is racist policing as a standard within the system, and we still haven't gotten very far in changing that.
Now, it has also almost become a taboo in the European Union, but also in the United States, to criticize Israeli government policies without being accused, accused of being anti-Semitic. Do you see this as a dangerous conflation, and what are the possible consequences for pro-Palestinian advocacy?
I think it's just a false argument that is being used. It's very easy to accuse somebody of anti-Semitism, and it really sticks with you. It's very bad usually for your reputation, but I think that is also changing because, let's be honest, it's very clear to make a distinction between the right of Jewish people to have their dignity, their rights protected everywhere in the world, and the Israeli government, which is a far-right government at this moment that is committing war crimes. These are completely two different things. And criticizing one doesn't mean like you hold any grudge against Jewish people in general. This is completely ridiculous. And we have to be clear that Jewish people in many countries are also leading the protests against the state of Israel. And I think at this point, I can only encourage people to speak out. I think at this moment, anyone who doesn't share the line of Netanyahu or the IDF is automatically being accused of anti-Semitism. So it becomes actually completely meaningless. And I think that is a danger because anti-Semitism as such does exist, and we have to take it serious. And for example, in Germany, we do have to protect places of prayer, Jewish museums, and so on.
Yes.
But these are two entirely different things, and we have to speak out, even if it means we are being accused.
Right. Carola, what is interesting? We have seen quite an odd alliance over the last couple of years between Europe's far-right politicians who have often made some rather anti-Semitic statements and who have been cozying up to Netanyahu's far-right government. What exactly is driving this sort of relationship, in your opinion, and how worried should we be about this convergence?
In my opinion, what unites all these people, these different far-right groups, is the dream of an ethno-nationalist state in many ways, and that reaches from Russia to India, even to the US or, of course, Austria, Germany. This is a common dream which these far-right groups have, and it's about national identity, it's about traditional family values, and it's about also identifying with religion. And I think at this moment, this is what their alliance is being built on, and I think it's very dangerous generally, because that rise in religious feelings, focus on traditional family values, it also puts in danger women's rights, the rights to abortion, for example, the rights of minorities. All of that is endangered by this narrative of the ethno-nationalist state.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're a member of the European Parliament. How strong is your group, your movement in the European Parliament, and are you often on the same page with your fellow European members of the European Parliament when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to migrants, when it comes to Gaza?
I'm a member of the left group in the parliament, and on Gaza, I think everyone is extremely united, as well as on migration. I think, to be honest, there's different positions when we're talking about the conflict in Ukraine, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, but very generally, the left stands very strongly on the side of the Palestinian people since decades. And I think increasingly now we can see that political groups like the Greens, Social Democrats are voicing more openly their criticism of the genocide. But in general, in this House, unfortunately in this Parliament, we don't have a majority to call out the genocide. And it's truly shameful.
Right. I mean, the left in Europe has traditionally been very strong in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, even parts of in Greece for some time. How about today, when it comes to the Central and North European countries, the Nordic countries? How strong is the left?
Well, I think there are differences, but we can really see that the far right is growing. Yeah. And is using fear, for example, of immigrants to deviate the attention away from the fact that billionaires and super rich people are influencing our political decision making, are hoarding more and more money. Like people like Bezos or Elon Musk, they have like insane amount of wealth. Like even in the times of kings and tsars, nobody ever had this amount of wealth to control the population. I think what we would need to do is unite people, unite the working class, unite the middle class against the super rich who are kind of profiting from all the business. And other people are suffering from austerity everywhere, and austerity is real, and it drives the fear in you not to be able to provide for your family. And that makes people blame their fingers and point to someone else who's responsible. But we have to unite, and I think in some countries that is working better than in others.
Right. Carola, the EU's response to Gaza has been worlds apart from its stance on Ukraine in terms of, language, to sanctions against Russia, to, the media attention. What do you think this says about Europe's credibility and its universal values? And if this goes unchanged, will the EU in the long term lose its credibility to present itself as the universal defender of human rights?
Well, I would say the European Union doesn't have a lot of credibility about defending human rights. And I say that because I've been advocating for the rights of migrants and refugees. And you can see that racism is everywhere in these institutions. And I think you can also see racism in the way how we are supporting people in Ukraine, but not supporting people in Gaza. Or you can see that after natural disasters, for example, people donate more money if the victims are white, but if people come from Pakistan, it's different. You can see that everywhere, and I think there's
sorry to stop
anti-Muslim
are we talking about inherent
rhetoric.
Are we talking about here inherent racism and Islamophobia among certain European politicians?
Not only among the politicians, but in the general population, and that is also being fueled by the far right. And so definitely in the case of Gaza, the fact that people are predominantly Muslim, that they're non-white, it all feeds into this colonial heritage of the relationships between white Europeans and the rest of the world. So white people in Europe just do not care as much about anybody who doesn't have their skin color. There is racism in how much we care about anybody, unfortunately.
This is interesting that you mentioned. I remember when I was covering the migrant crisis in 2015 and 16, when migrants, Syrian, Iraqi and Afghani migrants made their way from Turkey across Greece and, Serbia and Hungary, they were met with police brutality, attack dogs, and so on and so forth, and beaten pretty badly. Compare that with in 2022 when refugees from Ukraine made their way towards the Baltic states and Estonia and Poland. They were met with a lot of warmth, a lot of hospitality. People, various artists playing the piano on the border between Ukraine and Poland. A very warm welcome, and it's a stark contrast between how Muslim migrants and refugees are treated and how white Ukrainian refugees are treated as well by the same European Union.
Yes, this is true, unfortunately, and I think we have to be clear what our values are as human beings. Everyone should have the same rights. This is what we agree to on an international level, and that we can, I think, also agree to just from our heart, because if you know these people, typically, let's be honest, if people know somebody, if the people in Gaza, let's say, if they were your neighbors, people would care. People would help them. But because they're quite far away and you only see them on television screen, on Instagram, it's much easier for people to disassociate themselves. But I do believe that people, if they have a personal connection, they will have the humanity to help. But we have to mobilize that. We have to be on the streets. We have to put pressure on politicians. I think we can't give up on our humanity and just let this genocide happen.
All right. As we move towards the end of our interview, let me ask you one more question. Tomorrow, Friday, you will be flying to Egypt and you'll take part in the Gaza march. It's very heavy with symbolism. What exactly do you plan to achieve, and what message do you plan to send to the wider world and to your fellow members of the European Parliament?
The March to Gaza really is a grassroots movement by activists from people around the globe who are heading a call by labor unions actually from Palestine to come to the border to Rafah and protest there, which has been done in history before. So people from over 80 different countries are going to go to Egypt and join this march towards Rafah border to protest there for aid deliveries, for opening up the border, and of course for an end to the genocide. And me as a parliamentarian, I've been asked to accompany them, and I want to give my support to grassroots movements because I'm also a grassroots activist and not like a party member.
Right. Carola, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time and for sharing your insights with Al Jazeera.
Thank you.